I'm not a fan of the Gen 2 remakes. Finally, I said it. Honestly, this video has been kind of hard to make because I don't know how to start it. I originally had this stupid title called Johto Isn't As Good As You Remember, sorry, like I'm some English guy that represents himself as a circle with glasses. But throughout the entire process of that video, I was just filled with this anger that made the whole script venomous. Fun to write and fun to voice, no doubt, but I had come to resent the hour-long script by November. I felt like I had lost something by what was meant to be the third episode of an analytical, lighthearted design doc series about Pokemon games. It sat in my editing program just begging me to do something about it, and it wasn't until my hour-long trip home from work one day that I kinda came to a realization. I was listening to a TEDx talk from an inspiration of mine, Cat Icarus, and he talked about content creation and what it did to him. It's rough admitting that because, people from all walks of life tell me the same things he spoke about, but it wasn't until I heard the words coming from yet another English guy that it kind of stuck to me just how much a certain project was making me feel. I know my friends are watching this and are probably ready to hit me in the balls with a bag of nickels, but guys, forgive me. So what's this video about? Well, it's about the structure of games that are far and wide considered some of the best in the business of the creature capture subgenre of JRPGs. Games that are, and I mean this, the single best remakes of older games in their series. My name is Sonata, and you're watching Victory Road, a series about Pokemon games and how they craft their central narratives. Today, we're talking about Pokemon Soul Silver. Let's dive in. Wait, wrong series that I'm ripping off. So the original draft of this video really wanted structure, and I can't tell you that I don't want that either. The problem is that I wouldn't shut up and I got angry. I have to be entirely real with you guys, this game did make me a bit angry. I felt a very lingering resentment due to things that weren't the overall structure, but I did have some nuggets of actual insight there, so let's talk about that. I think something key when it comes to Pokemon game structure that I don't account for in my timelines is non-gym oriented towns. Let's take an example from Fire Red Leaf Green, I think it'll illustrate my point. So out of the 10 towns and cities around Kanto, 8 of them have gyms in them. This makes sense, of course, 8 gyms and whatnot, but the other 2 places are just as important. Pallet Town and Lavender Town are those 2 non-gym towns, and since one of them has to be the town you start in, where the other one is placed is super important. It's common in Pokemon games that the second town you visit isn't where your league challenge starts. So, it makes sense that Lavender Town is second on the Kanto journey, right? And that's where Kanto gets you. The second town on your list of towns you go to is one that, yes, harbors a gym, but doesn't get visited as part of your gym challenge until the end. You guys know this, it's not news. Where Lavender Town is placed is actually after the 3rd gym in a normal playthrough, and you visit it multiple times. You visit a lot of cities multiple times. Under or through them, it's one of the greatest strengths that Kanto has, and it's something I wish more games replicated. Traveling around the country isn't a linear thing in Pokemon. Or rather, it shouldn't be. It's one of the main complaints that I personally have with Black and White, despite them being right up there as my favorites. One thing that I think Johto fails in is that you go through it very linearly, and in very ordered fashion. The second town you visit, Cherry Grove City, doesn't harbor a gym at all, and you also visit it maybe twice before leaving, and never ever coming back. It's also one of 2 towns in Johto that don't feature a gym, and since the first one doesn't have one either, what I'm getting at is, in Johto, there's no genuine reprieve from the gym challenge once it's started. Every town you are in until you beat the 8th gym is in service to the league. This is something that only it and Unova do. And I recognize that coming from me, Unova slander is insane. But even I have to recognize it. The difference is that at least in Unova, there doesn't feel like there's this clawing of multiple other factors that I'm not going to get into. Gym leaders are very present in Unova, in all things. They're involved in their towns because they mean something. The Lake of Rage almost encapsulates what I feel is wrong, because it almost feels like it was meant to be this optional thing you could do to see a cool Pokemon, but it's actually required. Like, I feel as though Shiny Gyarados should have been something insane that people stumbled upon through natural curiosity, not something that the game forced you to go do to advance the story, which I also know sounds insane, right? Like, the game should grab your head and point you to the cool shit, but hear me out. Maybe it's my inner 12-year-old listening to Linkin Park and 3 Days Grace for the first time, but the Lake of Rage sounds fucking awesome. I would have gone there without having to be guided there. That's where I go to make piss. I mentioned a bit ago about how many towns there are that don't have gyms in them, and while I don't think it's a smoking gun of a problem, more so how they're placed, I do think that a lot of them on the critical path does have something to do with how beloved a game is in the series. Think about how many towns and cities are in Emerald and Platinum. It's a lot, by the way. Then think about how many of those don't have gyms in them. In Hoenn alone, not counting Evergrande City since it's just the Pokemon League, there's 7 non-gym towns that you go to throughout the entire game. It's not even like there's a town between every gym. Pacific Log Town I think is totally optional if I remember correctly, but there's just a lot? Like, sometimes you go from gym town to gym town, but then there's a stop in a big city that doesn't have anything to do besides plot. But it all feels like I'm being naturally pushed in the right direction. That's it. That's the overall structural problem I have with Johto. I feel like I'm being guided, but unguided at the same time. I feel like I'm being nudged in a certain direction, but also being treated as if the world is my clam. But it's not my clam. It's my oyster, and I'm stealing jokes from an extremely goofy movie, so you know I'm desperate for a punchline.
Well, no thanks, I'm saving room for weenies.
Stop looking at me like that. I feel like the game is paced way fast. Like, you just bang out, in proper order, Gym 4, Gym 5, and Gym 6. It's just back to back with nothing in between. And I do mean nothing in between. One of the greatest strengths of Kanto is that during your journey, despite the requirement of the Safari Zone, there's still plenty of stuff to do that lent it a structure and a feeling of exploration. A feeling that there's more here, a feeling that you're doing what all kids do. Having a good time. You go under cities, you stop in to get something and go somewhere else, and come back. I think the coolest thing that I can only pinpoint Kanto and Hoenn doing is that you visit a town very early that houses a gym you just can't challenge yet, but you come back later to take it on. Of course, in Kanto, it's after you defeat Team Rocket that Giovanni comes back as the 8th gym leader, mastering combining the League and the opposition. Hoenn has you facing your father as the 5th gym leader starting the second half of the League, and that's really cool! Johto just has you pinging city with a gym after city with a gym, and one problem I just want to bring up is Cianwood City. It's so closed off, but it's required entering, not for the gym challenge, but for medicine for Ampharos back in Olivine. You can, very easily, just get in and get out, if it weren't for the fact that they trusted you to go looking for the gym. I mentioned this in the previous draft, and it's going to come up in the Ultra Moon episode. But I feel like Johto, of all places, might have benefited from having a regional challenge related to coming of age, rather than being fitted with a specific league challenge. Shared with Kanto, since the Indigo League is meant for both Kanto and Johto. I'm not going to get into it. I spent way too long on it last time I tried talking about it, but still. Structurally speaking, there's more things here that I like and don't like, and I'd like to talk about them. So in the original releases of these games, your box legend was basically optional. You didn't have to go catch it, but you know, you wanted to because it was on the box. I'm not going to fault people for that. It's like punching Gormagala in the face in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. You wanted to do it. To that end, I don't necessarily think it's a problem that Pokemon games from Generation 3 onward make sure you encounter it. I think it's cool in a sense. The one thing I wish they would do is take a page from Monster Hunter's book. Make the thing that's on the box mandatory, but not even the coolest thing you fight in that game. Or the point, as it were. Like, I wish that Sword and Shield were represented by, like, Sirfetch'd and something else Shield-like. Maybe Corviknight, if it weren't the regional bird. That's a terrible idea. But do you see what I mean? Phalanx might actually be a better Pokemon to sell the idea of a shield, but good luck selling games with Phalanx if you're not already on board with them. We are going to beat you to death! I do think, however, that Soul Silver and, by extension, Heart Gold, faltered when they decided to make Lugia and Ho-Oh mandatory to finish the game. I think that remaking games shouldn't necessarily change the structure, if that makes sense. Gen 1, Gen 3, and Gen 4 remakes don't necessarily update how the game itself plays out, which isn't to say that they all succeed, but they do shine a modern-ish light on what made those games tick, for better and for worse. If the fight was still mandatory but took place after you fought Lance, I don't think I'd be calling it out like I am right now. But it's the fact that I got stopgapped by it right as I finished the 8th gym and Lyra tells me to go deal with the kimono girls or some shit that I got pretty upset. If I could fit it into this video, I'd love to talk about the Pokemon selection, the gym leaders themselves, Team Rocket as they relate to all of this, and bitching about the post-game, which I still haven't done. Most of that complaining is about greater Pokemon fans treating it as if it's not just an optional piece of content. It's not like Dragon Quest XI where I am, like, actually missing a third of the fucking game. Unfortunately, I want to keep my blood pressure down to a reasonable level. So what can we learn from Heart Gold and Soul Silver? As the timeline for this game scrolls on screen, and I try to remember that this is meant to be low-key educational for people making their own Pokemon games or JRPGs in general, I try to ask myself what these games in specific say about the overall growth of what a Pokemon game is meant to be. The thing I'm thinking of is that, quite possibly, Heart Gold and Soul Silver have the most expansive post-game in the main series? Maybe? So long as the DLC doesn't count for things like Sword, Shield, Scarlet, and Violet. People tout it as the best, a whole ass new region to explore and whatnot, but I'm not entirely so sure. Not because I doubt the quality, but because I don't have the experience. These games do a lot of things right. I think it's important that for games like this, you update what made the past work just enough. You change what people maybe didn't like, and you keep the things that were just good. You streamline things so that they're actually noticed, or just combine features. The reason why BDSP don't work as well as remakes is because they're so alike the originals that they don't do any work to make a distinct difference. The thing about Crystal that people like, aside from nostalgia, is just how different it feels compared to other games on the Game Boy Color and such. How big just Crystal felt in and of itself. I think there's a place for Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Crystal to exist, if that makes sense. Where I try to find a lesson in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it's just that polishing your games is just as important as making it. The meme on Twitter for a little bit was to just make the thing exist, you can make it good later. A lot of people would consider Crystal to be just making the thing exist, while Heart Gold and Soul Silver make it good later on. A sentiment I'm partial to agree on. Where I think you can learn from Gen 2 in specific doesn't have much to do with the timeline. On that front, I think you should space your major events around, get a genuine feel for your own pacing and such. It's a subjective thing, I understand, but still. On an inner detail scale, don't separate what makes your game stand out so hard. One of my chief complaints is that the Lake of Rage showcases a shiny Gyarados. Not a shiny Pokemon from, I don't know, the generation itself. So much of the game's Pokemon are locked to the second half of the game, to another region. There's times and places to show off what your game is made of, time and places to make your players get it. There's also a time and place to let your players kind of do what they want. You have to learn which parts of your game are which, and that's a growing process. The biggest lesson from Heart Gold and Soul Silver also apply to Gold, Silver, and Crystal. They're stepping stones on the way to true greatness, something I hope you understand won't come from your first project, your second project, or hell, maybe even your third. You just gotta find what works and keep going, because art is really hard. Share it with someone you love. Fuck, I took that ending bit for myself. I'm such a hack!